All right, we're back for part three of learning about the Monty Hall problem with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you remember right from last time, we created a game. We can actually choose a door and have the host, Hall in this case, reveal a goat behind a different door, like door three, and then we get to decide whether we want to keep door two or switch to door one. We click keep, and oh no, it was a goat. I'm so sad. Or maybe I'm very happy. Either way, though, we were asking the question, would if we always keep, is that going to give us, more cars? Or if we always switch, is that going to give us more cars? Or does it even matter? And the way to answer that is with something called the Monte Carlo method. Monte Carlo has nothing to do with Monty Hall. Monte Carlo is a reference to a computer science idea that, simply put, just means try it a whole bunch of times and see what happens. Computers can do that, unlike in real life where, actually playing this game tens of thousands of times might take you quite some time and no one probably cares that much. A computer can do this in under a second. So, what's the idea behind Monte Carlo? Well, imagine you're flipping a coin and you flip it 10 times. You get 3 heads. Does that tell you anything about the probability of heads versus tails? Is it really a 30% chance of getting a heads and a 70% chance of getting a tails? Probably not. Could be a bad coin. You never know. But we all know that time and chance happen to all people. Like, this is a normal thing. You can have all the probability in your favor and just weird things happen, right? In the short term, under a very few number of tries, this can happen. It's normal. But if you flipped that coin 10,000 times and you got 3,000 heads, that would start to look really suspicious, right? I mean, if it really were a 50-50 shot, we should expect 5,000 heads, and if we get 3,000, that's a couple thousand off. That is a lot of missing heads in that case. Too many tails. So that's the idea behind Monte Carlo. Is if we do it a whole bunch of times, the results that we get are going to start to approximate the real probability. The more times we do it, the closer to the real probability we get. And so if you imagine flipping a coin 1,000,000 times and you got 300,000 heads instead of 500,000, you're going to figure out that that coin is totally messed up and is very much weighted towards tails, and start voting on tails a lot more than heads if you are trying to win something based on calling the coin flip. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to have the computer play this game for us by choosing a random door for us, basically doing the equivalent of pressing this button, and then pressing either the keep or the switch button. We'll tell it which one, and it'll just press it every time, and tell us how many times did you win. Out of the total number of times, that will give us an estimate of the real probability. So how are we going to do this? Well, I have my entire page right now devoted to playing the game, but I kind of want like a separate tab here to be devoted to analyzing the game, playing it a whole bunch of times, as we said. And how are we going to do that? Well, we can just do the same trick we did for step 1, 2, and 3. If you remember right, step 1, 2, and 3 were div tags, and we just hid them until we wanted to show them. What if I put my entire page so far inside a div tag and hid it and showed a different div tag? That was the analyze game content. If I have some buttons up at the top that will make into a tab bar, and I can click them and it'll show one or the other, then I can actually have 2 games kind of on the same page, but only show one at any given moment. So that's what I'm going to do. If I go up to here to the top of my code, I'm going to put before line 1 here, I'm going to hit enter at the very front of that line to give myself some space at the top. And I'm going to type another div tag to put the entire thing, the entire page inside another div. Now remember, I have to close the div tag, so I'm going to go all the way to the bottom and close the div tag with the slash div. Now, I like my code to be kind of indented to show the nesting here, so I'm going to click this button and say format HTML, and notice it indents everything. So again, that's this button, format HTML. It just makes your code look nice. Now you can see by the indentation that all of the page is now inside this one div. And I'm going to call this, if you remember right, we kind of need an ID or something to grab this div tag and hide it at some point. I'm going to say ID equals play game in quotes. So this will let me from code hide the play game, the play game div. Now below, I scroll down here and I want to add my analyze game div, right? This is going to be the rest of the content we're going to show if somebody clicks an analyze button, which we haven't made that button yet, but we will in a moment. So here we go, div. Let's just do the ID right now. ID equals analyze game. And then I'm going to just say, analysis content here. This is kind of a placeholder. Maybe I'll put a to do in front of this to really make this clear that this is not what I actually want to put in there in the end. And then we close the div tag here. So what do we see? Well, we see these boxes around things. Remember that all of our div tags have a border around them. We're going to have to fix that in a second. But notice that the entire game that we were playing before is inside this first div, the play game one. And then the analyze game div is down here. And so as long as we hide one and show the other, everything should go fine. Let's make those buttons now, and then we'll wire those up in a second. So I'm going to go back up to the top here and create those two buttons, the one that I can say play game or analyze game. Now, I'm going to go again to the front of this line and hit enter to kind of give myself some space above here. And I'm going to say div button. Remember our button HTML element, play game, close button tag. So notice, and I'm going to close this div tag too here just so it looks nice to begin with. There we go. That looks a little better. So you can see there's a play game button up in here above the other two divs. And then I'm going to add my other button here, button analyze game. These buttons, of course, don't do anything yet, and that's okay. I am going to do one more thing too. It will be useful later to have an ID on this one as well. So I might as well just give it an ID now. ID equals tabs. That way it just lets us select tab buttons easily by ID versus buttons inside of our play game or our analyze game divs. So we'll use that from CSS to kind of do some tab bar formatting. So there we go. This looks like kind of garbage, honestly, but we do have our sections now. We have our tab bar. We have our game that still works, by the way. I can keep pressing buttons here. And we have our analyze content div. So now I want to make it look a little better than this. Let's start with the tab bar. I want to get rid of maybe this box around that. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of my CSS here and hit enter. And then just like I did with Winning's image and step 2 and step 3, which were all IDs, the hashtag on the front of them selects by ID. So I say hashtag tabs. That'll select this div right here. And then I just say, curly braces, hit enter to give yourself space there, and border none. And voila, the border disappears. Woohoo! Okay, we're already on our way. What about these two? Well, that's the play game and the analyze game divs. I could just say comma, play game, comma, analyze game here. If you remember right, comma just says, you know what? All of these things set their border to none. Just the ID tabs, the ID play game, and the ID analyze game. Notice that worked. Woohoo! So that's not bad. Of course, it's weird that it's showing all of them. We do need to fix that still. But I want to show one more idea for how to do this. Instead of using them by ID, we can use something called a class. Classes are just like IDs in terms of they're usually used to select elements, but unlike an ID, they don't have to be unique. And unlike an ID, the same HTML tag can have multiple classes if it so wants. Classes think categorization. So let me show this in practice. Like we're categorizing things. We're saying all the following things are this class, this category. So I'm going to go up here, and after ID, I'm going to say class equals, this is tab content. Okay, fine. That didn't do anything, of course, yet because I haven't said what to do with this class. But unlike an ID where I cannot have another play game ID somewhere else, I can have another class equals tab content. And that's exactly what I'm going to do down here. I'm going to say, you know what? Analyze game is also class equals tab content. So I have two divs that have the class tab content. If I wanted other classes like class 2, class 3, I just separated my spaces there and all of those classes apply, and that's fine. But I only need one right now. How do I do anything with that from CSS? Well, unlike IDs, which are always hashtags, we use dots for classes. So I'm going to go down here in my CSS, hit enter to get myself a new line, and say dot tab content. This says select everything with the class tab content. And I can also say here, border none. So that's cool. It did the exact same thing as before when I just did the hashtag play game, hashtag analyze game. But you can imagine that if you had a lot of different tab contents, like 10 of them, it'd be kind of annoying to come up with different names for them all. And really what you're trying to say is, I want everything that's in this class of things, everything in the tab content class to just have the same format. So that list would get really long. This just allows us to give one word for it, dot tab content, which refers to both this class and this class. So admittedly, our tab bar does not look like a tab bar. It looks like two buttons sitting right next to each other. I'm going to fix that at least a little bit right now. We'll get a bit fancier in a moment, or a little bit later, I should say. But one thing that would be nice is just to actually have some kind of, gray background to this bar, right? And so that's what I want to do to my tabs div. I want to give it a background color. So I'm going to go into my CSS here inside the tabs, the hashtag tabs div here, and hit enter and type background color. And if I said gray here, for instance, well, that at least gave me a background. It's a little too dark. I could go for like light gray, right? See if that does any better. Closer to what I want. I'll also show, though, that, of course, just like we did before, you can click the Assets tab. And, if you're selected on any of these other things, you can click Colors. And let's just choose this fourth from the left one. I kind of like that shade of gray, so I'm going to click that. And notice it copied the hex code EO to clipboard. So all I do is close that, delete light gray, and paste this in. And it got a little bit lighter. I'm going to go with that. I will mention one thing that I didn't mention before, that this hashtag is not actually obviously referencing any ID in your HTML. This is a different use, a second use of hashtag in CSS. You can reference here IDs in your HTML, but when it comes to colors, this is just a way of saying I'm going to give you a hex code for the color. So there you go. That's the second use of hashtags. Cool. So we have a background color to our tab bar. I also need to format my buttons though, right? Like this kind of looks silly. They definitely still look like buttons. There's a border around them. Background color isn't quite right. Let's fix both of that. If I come down here and hit enter and say tabs space button and then curly braces. Notice that what this does, if you remember right from last time, is it says I'm going to format all buttons inside the thing with ID tabs. So in that case, that's just these two buttons. But if you had more buttons, it would apply to them as well. Even if there was 10 of them here, it would apply to all 10 because all 10 of those buttons would be inside up here, the div with ID tabs. So first thing, I don't like that border. Let's set the border to none. And voila, looks a lot better. Background color is still not quite right. So I can set that to background color. And I can just, use the exact same thing here, hashtag E0, 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 semicolon. And it looks at least better. Like the background colors match. That's good. You might get kind of annoyed, though, if you ever change this value. You have to remember to change this value or else it won't look right. There is a nicer way to do this. Because button is inside the tabs ID, and we've already set the tabs, whoops, sorry about that, tabs ID to have this background color. It'd be nice if we could just inherit the background color from the surrounding div. And you can do indeed just that by typing the word inherit. CSS has this built in. So now if I change this to light gray again, everything gets darker and the button backgrounds also get darker at the same time. I only have to change one thing. I'm going to undo that and put the E0, E0, E0 back. So there we go. It's a little bit lighter now. And there you go. Now, there's one more thing that looks a little weird here. There's not quite enough spacing around my tab bar. I want a little bit more. So that's one last thing I'm going to do before I kind of call it quits there. I'm going to hit enter here and say, you know what? Give me some padding around my buttons. If you remember right, REM is a pretty standard way of doing this. You can play around with the values here. Like 1 would be probably a little too big, but 0.5 looks pretty nice. And so notice now that I actually have my buttons, but they look a lot more like part of some kind of tab bar and less like a bunch of buttons. So let's now show only one of play game or analyze game and not both at the same time. We could do this in the same way we've done before. If you remember right, I'll scroll down here to my restart game function. We would say document.getElementById by ID, step 2, and then say .style.display equals none. That would reset it to, hide the block entirely. And then elsewhere in one of the steps up above, we would set the, style display to block when we wanted to show it. That's totally fine. We could do that here too. I'm going to show the class way only because, again, classes are kind of like IDs, except you can have more than one class for a single HTML tag, and you can have more than one HTML tag have the same class. So they're a lot like a more flexible ID in that way. Let's just show that we can do something similar here. I am going to show it with CSS too. So let's actually get the CSS right first. In tab content down here, let's just hide all of our tab contents, both the play game and analyze game. If you remember right, tab content is the class we have on both our play game and down here, analyze game divs. So I'm going to just set display to none here. And notice it hides them both. Well, that's not quite what I want. Of course, I want to show one of them. So let's add a second class here. I'm going to call this selected. Remember, if I want more classes, I just put a space and type the name of the next class in there. And how do I select this in CSS to show it? Well, here I can just say .tab content .selected. So that selects something that has both the class tab content and selected. And I'm going to set the display to block instead. Notice I get what I wanted. I wanted only one of my divs to show up, and indeed one of them is showing up. The analysis one, because I've set the selected class here. If I get rid of the selected class here and add it instead to the other div, then notice it shows me only the play game div. So now I can play my game like usual and it's all here. So now what we've done is instead of having to set .style .display down here in our code, all we really need to do is add or remove a class from a div in order to hide it or show it. So again, different way to do the same thing. I'm going to move the selected back here just to show that content only. So the analysis game is showing there. I need my buttons to do this though, right? Like I don't want to just like sit here and edit my code to say which one's selected. I want to actually, if I hit play game, I want it to move in code the selected class over here. And if I hit analyze game, I want it to put the selected class on this one. So let's hook up our buttons. This goes identically to how it went before. We just scroll up here till we find our buttons and we add the onClick attribute. OnClick equals quotes. We're going to make a function called showGame. And I'm going to give it one input, either the string play, and remember I have to use single quotes around that because I don't want to conflict with the double quotes around the entire thing. That will confuse it, and play will be outside all quotations if you put double quotes there. So on click, show game play. And this one, on click equals show game, parentheses, brackets, analyze in single quotes. So this is going to call a JavaScript function called showGame when I click either of these buttons. Let's go make that function down here. So I'm going to add it right here. Just keep my setup line on the bottom. Don't think it really matters too much. Function showGame. I need a capital there or else that won't work to match the capital G here. And I'm going to say the input is called mode. So console.log mode. Let's just see this in action. I'm going to, and I'll put a string in here too, just so I can see it saying mode. I think that's usually helpful to see the string so that if you have multiple console.logs, you can tell which one is logging what. In this case, not a problem, since we only have one. Okay, I'm going to open my console. I'm going to clear that. And now when I click play game, notice it's sending me in the string play, and here it's sending me in the string analyze. So that's working as hoped. So now I actually need to make it hide or show the analysis content or the play game content by moving the selected class around. So in my show game function, I'm going to remove this console line. We don't need it anymore. And I'm going to do something similar to what we've done before. I'm going to loop through all the things I want to hide and or loop through all the things I either want to hide or show and just hide them all to begin with, and then just show the right one that I want to show after that. So we're going to use a for loop for this. This is very similar to other for loops that we did last time. So for, and we're going to say item of, it's always for item of, or for something, the variable name of. And now we're going to grab a whole bunch of elements by class. I mean, technically there's only 2 of them right now, but we could have a lot of tab content, right? I want to go through all the things that have class tab content, 2 things in this case, and remove the selected class from them. That'll make sure none of them are selected, and then I'll just select the right one after that for loop. So I'm going to say for item of document, and now we get to learn a third one of these. Document.getElementById was the first one. Document.querySelectorAll was the second one, and now document.getElementsByClassName. Very similar to document.getElementById, but notice it's plural, elements by class name. So let's type that, elements by class name. And that's a hint that when you get elements by class name, you expect there to be multiple of them. Even if there's only one, then the for loop will only run one time, and that's fine. It can do that. And now I need to give it the class name I want to grab all the elements for. So quotes, tab, content. And we always have our curly braces that define what code we're going to run repeatedly, right? So this is a lot like query selector. It's like a weird combination of query selector all and get element by ID, except it's just targeting class names. Now, could you do query selector all here? Yes, because if you remember right, dot tab content selects all classes of the class tab content. So either of these will work. Get elements by class name has to do a little less thinking because it knows it's looking for classes. Could be other reasons to use it too, I suppose. But it's more direct. We're going to use that just to show off the third case because it's very common to be messing with things by class. Okay, so this is going to select both the div tags. It's going to select this div tag on the second run, and it's going to select this div tag on the first run. And all I want to do is remove the selected class. So I'm going to say item.classList. Remember, there's a list of classes possibly on each of these things, even if there's only one. And I'm going to say .remove and quotes with brackets and quotes selected, semicolon. So Don't worry if selected isn't there. You might wonder, what's it going to do if it doesn't find selected and you say remove selected? It's going to do the right thing. It's going to be like, there's no selected. Done. So that's going to work. It's actually going to remove selected from here, which does nothing. It's going to come down here and remove selected from this, so both of them don't have selected as a class anymore. Now we need to add the right one. Well, how do we do that? Remember that mode here is going to be set to either play or analyze. So if it's play, we want to show the first thing by adding the selected class to the first div tag. If it's analyze, we want to add it to the second div down here, the ID analyze game. So I'm going to write an if statement for that. If, and we always need our brackets here, mode or parentheses, mode equals, and remember we need a double equals to compare two things together, not to set it equal, but to actually test whether it's equal. And if mode equals play, and again, JavaScript couldn't care less about single or double quotes as long as you are consistent with the same string, like you can't begin one with a single quote and end one with a double quote. So just a reminder, yes, I can say double quote play here, even though up here it was single quote play. JavaScript considers single quote play and double quote play the same thing. So anyway, if mode equals play, document, dot, and now we're going to do get element by ID. We want to select a specific one, the play game div. And we want to say dot class list dot add. Brackets, quote selected, semicolon. So notice here we say go through each of the tab content divs and say dot class list, like get me the class list, and then remove from it selected if it's there. And then this one says, okay, get me the specific play game div and get me the class list. It'll have tab content in it already, and add to that also the selected class. So it'll add a space selected for you. You don't have to do that here. You don't have to put a space in front of the S. It's smart enough to handle that. And we do need to handle our other case. Remember else. Otherwise, if mode is not play, then we want to document.get element by ID analyze game and say dot class list dot add selected. So same idea, just we're adding the selected class to the other content. Okay, let's see that in action. If I hit play game, it shows my original game, right? With my goat, and I can just keep, I actually got a car that time, and I can restart. But if I click analyze game, it shows me just this content here. So play game, analyze game lets me switch back and forth between the two modes of operation between those two div tags. So how is this different from what we did before? Well, we did use class, but we could have done query selector all with play game and analyze game in here, just like we had done before. So I could say document.query selector all, hashtag play game, comma, hashtag analyze game, and that would have selected both elements. Here I used get elements by class name, so that's one difference. The second difference is here I would have said item.style.display equals none to hide them. Instead, I actually added the class selected, the class selected, which means that this style is no longer in play because this is only for selected divs. It means the display is none here. So again, I used CSS attached to a class name to show or hide here. Same down here. Instead of .style.display equals block, I added the class list selected to cause it to display as a block. Why? Who cares, right? Why didn't I just do what I did before? And the answer is, what if you wanted to actually do more than display none and display block? What if you had several styles? What if I wanted, when it was selected, to make the font size bigger and to make it red and to make it bold? That's 3 different CSS attributes. it can be a lot easier to just assign a class to one or the other, like we've done here, and then here fill in the three properties like font weight, bold, and color, red, and things like that. And then in the non-selected version, set the style completely differently in those three cases. The font weight's normal, the size is less, the color is not red, it's black or something like that. So this allows us to actually save writing code if we have more complicated styles. In this case, we only had one, so it didn't save us anything. It didn't really cost us much either, though. And it showed that this is a useful technique when you have more style that you want to change than just one thing. And so useful, we'll keep it as is, and we'll keep going because now I actually want to style my tab bar a little better. I promised I was going to do that. It's a little hard to notice which tab is actually selected right now. So if I click this or click this, I kind of know what they both look like, but how does somebody know which tab they're on? So I want to fix that now. And I'm going to do that with classes again. So let's scroll up or go up to our HTML here. And on the Analyze Game button, I'm going to add one more thing here. Before the little closing angle bracket, this greater than sign, I'm going to say class equals selected to say this is the button that's currently selected right now. Now notice, of course, that doesn't do anything yet. It's worth noting that this may sound a little confusing because this class selected, there's now a third, there's now two selecteds, right? We had these two div contents that selected could kind of oscillate between either here or here. But now there's this third and going to be fourth thing that could hold selected, the two buttons. Fine. The fact that I've used the name selected again is totally okay because in CSS, notice it says things that have the class tab content and selected have display block or display none. This does not have the class tab content, so this CSS will not apply here. I could name this something completely different than selected, but this is just to show that it doesn't actually matter. As long as your CSS selects the right thing, you can reuse names and it's okay. So yeah, how do I select this? Well, hashtag tabs would select the div content, right? And then the class selected would select anything that's got that class on it inside hashtag tabs. So let's do that. I'm going to say hashtag tabs. And I could just say dot selected here, but I'm going to actually show that you can do this. You can say button dot selected. So what this does is this says, find me something with the ID tabs. So it selects this. And now it says anything inside that that's a button and has the class selected, apply this style to. Because there's only buttons inside this div tag, that wasn't strictly necessary. But if there were other things in here, maybe something that also had a class selected, you would want to be more specific. So yes, you can mix both HTML tags and dot class name on that HTML tag, and this works in CSS. So what do I want to make this thing look like when it's selected? Well, let's set a different background color to begin with. So I'm going to say background color, and I probably want it to be darker. I'm going to actually click here on my assets tab, and I'm going to go maybe the sixth one in from the left. Let's go with a darker gray. Notice it's copied 9E, 9E, 9E to the clipboard. So I'm going to paste that in here and not forget my semicolon at the end. And ooh, well, that looks nice. Now notice me clicking things doesn't actually do anything here. Again, I haven't made my code change the class between the two buttons yet. But if I manually do so, you'll notice that that indeed makes the other button look selected in some fashion. So that's good. I can even do a second style here. This will show off what I was just talking about with the classes can let you apply multiple styles in the same with the same line of code. By just moving the class around, you can apply several styles at once. So I'm going to say color yellow, let's say. So, ooh, that looks very selected now. I like it. So now all I need to do is write code to move this class between these two buttons, just like I did between the two divs down here. So let's go down to our showGame function. Remember, this is what gets run when we click a button. And let's do the same thing we did in this first for loop, where we went through the tab contents and removed selected. Let's remove selected from all these buttons. Now, I don't have another class here, right? Neither of these buttons have class tab content like the other thing did, so I can't use get elements by class name unless I added the same class to both of these. Instead, let's use query selector all. Query selector all is pretty flexible. For item of document dot query selector all, parentheses brackets, or whichever you want to call that, quotes. And now notice I really just want to run through all the buttons in my ID tabs, right? So hashtag tabs space button, right? That's going to go through all buttons inside the thing with ID tabs. And I'm going to say item dot class list dot remove, just like I did before. Bracket, quote, selected, semicolon. That will remove the selected class from both of these buttons now when I click the showGame button. So far not great, because if I click this, suddenly my selectedness is gone. I haven't re-added that selectedness yet. Now, down here, you'll notice if mode equals play, I want to add the selected class to this button. If mode is not play, I want to add the selected class to this button. I don't have an ID on these buttons, so I could just add an ID right now and do the exact same thing I did here. If I call this ID equals play game button, then I would say document.get element by ID play game button dot class list dot add selected. There is a slightly easier way I want to show with a special variable called this. This means whatever you just clicked, in this case a button. So if I say this, comma, without quotes, that special variable is this button. It says, okay, you just click this button, so I'm going to send in the button already for you. I don't have to say document.get element by ID play game button to get the button. I can just, grab this button directly. So I'm going to add that to both of these. So now my function showGame needs to take two inputs. The first one is the button, and the second one is this mode play or analyze. And so let's actually just look at what that does right now. I'm going to say console.log button, and I'll do my usual quotes, button, comma there, just to show what it's printing. So now let's open our console, and I'm going to click play game or analyze game. So see, when I clicked analyze game, I think I missed the click on the play game at first. When I click analyze game, notice it has the entire button in HTML. And when I click play game, notice it's selecting the play game button in HTML. That's exactly what I was going to do with document.get element by ID anyway. I was just going to grab the button and then say .classList.add. So this is actually really useful. That means down here, I can just say, well, I don't need to do document.get element by ID. I already have that button, the one that I want, inside the variable button. So let's just say button.classList.add selected. So again, I'm just adding the selected class to something I've selected, this button. It's just I got the button from the this keyword, which is always in onClick, the thing that you just clicked, in this case, a button. So even though these both say the same thing, this, the variable this has this button when you click that button, and this variable this has this button when you click that button. So it'll either way give you the right button that you just clicked. Again, down here, I want to say button.classList.add selected. So I can close my console now. In fact, I can get rid of my console line here. I don't need to see that anymore. I'll close my console by clicking this button. Notice when I click Analyze Game and Play Game, it's actually moving the selected class around and therefore making the style look darker gray and with yellow text. Now, there's one last thing to mention about this, which is you'll notice these lines of code were the same thing. Button.classList.add selected, button.classList.add selected. Because button always has the right thing in it, I didn't need to do something different depending on whether somebody clicked play or analyze. Button already changes based on what I just said. This variable already had the right button in it, which means there's no reason for this to be duplicated in the if statement. In the if and else, I'm doing the same thing here. So actually, it's identical if I just move this line of code out by cutting it and just move it out here and then delete it from here too. The idea is no matter what they selected, play or analyze, we always are going to take whatever button this gave us and just add the class selected to it. Notice that this still works just as we hoped, and that's good. Now, one last thing you'll notice when I refresh the game, so I'm going to, for a second, add like a letter in here just to have it do something weird here. And then back here, button.classList. Notice that when the game starts, play game is selected, but analyze game content is shown. That's because I have said by default start with the button selected, play game, but down here start with the analyze game div selected. I should be consistent here. If I'm going to say selected here, I should also say selected on this button instead of the other to make it consistent. So if you ever want to change which one's the default, you have to move both classes. It's something that can be remembered. There are ways to get around not having to duplicate that, but it's a little more complicated, and we're just going to do this right now, is just keep both of them in sync. That way, as you notice now, Analyze Game button is selected by default and the content is selected so it matches, and that's what I expect. And notice it never affected once I press a button, everything is consistent based on my code here. And so we've done that part. Now I want to style the tab bar just a little bit more just to show you what you can do with CSS. One nice thing you can do is add hover effects. So notice when I hover over this, you don't even notice that you can necessarily click it. It's nice if hover actually makes it change a little bit, just so you realize this is clickable, like you give the user some interaction, some feedback that they can interact with this and click it. So what we're going to do with that is learn about CSS pseudoclasses, specifically hover pseudoclass. So let's just go down here and try it out. I'm going to say, you know what? I want buttons that get hovered over to have a different background color. So hashtag tabs, because those are the buttons in my tab bar, and button again, and colon hover. It's like a double dot. It's not a class, it's a pseudo class, which is kind of like a fake class, but it's not fake. It does something real. It's just you haven't added the word hover anywhere in your HTML. Hover is something that the browser just knows about and can do something with. It automatically adds this class effectively when you hover over the button without you writing any code. So I'm going to do some curly braces here and make another background color. Again, from my color tab, I'll select the fifth one over, somewhere between the dark and the light that I did before. BD. Okay, we're going to paste that in, semicolon again. And let's see what that does. Ooh, not bad. Okay, so now I at least see what it can do. When I hover over it, notice it changes. So it looks like, yeah, you can click this. Something's happening here. Now, there's also something cool in CSS called animation that you can do. And I'll just show this for fun. If you scroll up to your tabs button, um, CSS, I can add something here called transition, 0.5 seconds. That's how long I want transitions on any buttons in my tabs ID to take when they change styles. So watch this now. A little slower. Notice how they fade in and out. I can make this very obvious by putting 2 seconds in here. Fades in, fades out while the other one's fading in. So you can do some pretty cool stuff with CSS. And this is just built in, and you can just say, please, when you're switching between two formats, fade. It would fade colors, sizes, other things like that. You'll actually see the size grow if you changed size here. So let me do that now. Font size, and I'm going to say like 0.8 REM. And then down here, I'm on the tabs button hover, I'm going to say 1.2 REM. So you'll notice it even does that. Now that just looks weird, so let's not do that. But you can actually do transitions between various style, and it can have some pretty neat effects. So I'm going to remove the font sizes that I just added now, and keep my standard transition here between the fade to the mid gray. Now, at this point, the spacing here might bother you, right? And the spacing here too while you're at it. It might look kind of weird and you're like, I want to get rid of this spacing. If you really do, the reason there's a space there is that horrid thing we said at the beginning of the entire lesson, which is that HTML will listen up to one space and actually put that space in. So that space is coming from right here in HTML. At the end of this button, I have a new line and some spaces and the other button. If I had both buttons next to each other without any space there, notice the buttons are completely together. There's no spacing. But that looks ugly in code, right? I kind of want the button here. So we can use something called an HTML comment to get rid of the space, to not have HTML include the space. HTML comments just look like less than exclamation minus minus. That starts a comment. Now notice that has commented out all of my code, and therefore all you're seeing is this play game button and everything else is gone. To end a comment, you do minus minus greater than. So anything written between this and the other thing is completely ignored. I am completely ignored. Yay. And notice there's still no space here because that one space is completely gone. It's like this just comes in the middle and says all of the spaces, all of the text, ignored. And so that's what happens. So I can get rid of this I am completely ignored thing. So basically, this is one way to get rid of the space. The other way is just put the button tags right next to each other. Either are fine. And one more thing, what about the spacing on the left here? Well, we can get rid of that by changing the padding on the left to 0 inside this tab bar. So if I scroll up to my tabs div and add one more thing here, I can say padding left 0. I could say 0 REM as well here, but because 0 is 0 no matter what unit you're using, you can just write 0 here. And notice now there is absolutely 0 space here. So that's how you can make your tab bar look a little better. There's one more thing I'm going to show, and then we'll actually get on to making the analysis content. And that last thing is, I want my tab content to look like it's part of the tab bar. I kind of expect a nice little gray border down here that just surrounds the content so that it's very clear that, you know, this tab bar is controlling the content underneath it in that little gray window. So I can do that, okay. In my CSS, I'm going to scroll down here to find my tab content class, which you'll remember, right, is on both the analysis and play game divs. So here's it on the play game div. So what I want is to give this a border. Now I'm going to give it a very thin border, 0.1 rem, that's fine. Solid border, and light gray should probably be sufficient here. I could match the tab bar exact gray if I wanted. So if I scroll up here, you'll notice that was EO, EO, EO. So I can, with the hashtag, kind of capture that and copy that in here. It's a little lighter. It matches exactly. Probably the best thing to do. All right, and with that, I noticed there's a few problems. Doesn't look like it's really part of the tab bar. It's kind of like hovering below it. There's also this top part, which I don't really want. I don't want a bar here. I've already got a tab bar. I want really just the border around the bottom and left and right. And last thing is I could actually use some extra spacing in here. That's really tight. Touching the border, it looks a little cramped. So let's just fix all that. Down here, let's take care of that top border part that we don't like first right here. Believe it or not, you can just override that. You can say border dash top none. So that says, okay, give me a border, but actually get rid of the top. I want no border on the top. And that works as expected. Spacing wise, we just do padding like we always do. Remember, padding's on the inside of a border, space or margins on the outside of the border. You'll notice there actually already is some padding here. And you might be wondering where that's coming from. And the answer is if you scroll up here to our div tag, you'll remember that we actually gave 0 padding to all divs on the top and bottom, but 1 rem on the left and right. 1 looks like a good amount. I really just want it to be 1 all around at this point. So I'm going to scroll back down to my tab content and just say, you know what? In tab content, I want my padding to be 1 rem all around. The padding on the left and right didn't change because it was already 1, but the top and bottom did, and that's a lot better space-wise. Now, last piece. I want the margins. That's the part outside the border. If you remember right, the top border was right here. The spacing outside that is a margin. Now, you might hope that you could just say, well, I want my margin top, and this is indeed the right thing to do, by the way. I want my margin top to be 0. No margin above my box. Why didn't that work? And the answer is, well, actually, both of these divs, the tab bar and the tab content, have margins. There's a margin top above this and a margin bottom below this bar. HTML and CSS say, you know what, if you have 2 margins, they're allowed to overlap. Just make sure, take the max of the 2 kind of thing. But we need to set both of them to 0 in order to make these actually touch. So not only does my tab content need to have no top margin, my tab bar, this hashtag tabs thing, the div tag with an ID of tabs, has to actually have a bottom margin of 0 as well. And there we go. That actually says, okay, neither have margin. Now they're right next to each other. And so finally, we can get to the actual analysis content tab. But this hopefully shows you what you can do with CSS and how you can make some pretty cool looking interfaces just by playing around a little bit with your styles. All right, as promised in the text, after I'd watched through the video, I noticed 3 problems. The first was when I said I should have said let item of. Down here, you'll notice earlier I had said let item of, and here I just said item of. It's nicer to say let here, and I wanted to just quickly show you why. If here I insert a line and say console.log item, and I'm going to put my normal quotes item here so I can just see that, yep, that is what I'm printing there. I'm going to open my console up, and show game is run when I click play game or analyze game. So notice I'm doing this. Notice I am getting a div tag. Item here still exists as a variable when I don't use the word let. So if I put let here, we'll see the difference. If I say let item of document and then click the button, notice there's an error. Item is not defined. So let basically keeps the item variable defined only inside that for loop and then doesn't let it exist outside of that. If you don't say let, it continues to live for the rest of the rest of your code here that we see. And why would I care? Maybe I don't here. It's not that big of a deal. For instance, I just redefine item immediately here and never use it again. This is called variable scoping. And usually you want to keep the variable alive for as little as possible so you don't accidentally reuse it or misuse it in a way you didn't expect. So if here I forgot to name this item and named this item, like without an E or something like that, I misspelled it. Unfortunately, this item still works if I don't have the word let here. Without the word let, the item variable still lives and now is referenced here. So I'm going to remove the wrong selected class from the previous item rather than this item. You won't catch this error without let, but here I would catch it. The code, in this code, item dies here, goes out of scope. Without the console, item still doesn't exist, and you'll notice the spelling mistake and fix it. So typically better to keep your variables tightly scoped. They call it scoped to just the place where you intended to use them. That's why using let across the board is just the right thing to do in general, unless you want a global variable. Unless you really wanted to define a global variable in one of your functions that applies, like, in a lot more places. Up here, you'll notice I even used let for my global variables because they're outside of functions, so they are only alive for the duration of the entire program in this case, because they're defined at the beginning and are not inside any function or other curly braces. So even though I use let, they're there the entire program down to the end, and that's fine. I always use let. It's just better. And then I just realized that the let means that it's only going to exist inside the curly brace scope and the for loop possibly surrounding it that I used the let in. So always use let, but just so you know, I made a mistake there in terms of nice style by not using that in the previous section. Second thing I wanted to mention here is the idea of classes. I had mentioned that class list here, remove selected. If you're wondering, it doesn't actually go and delete the word selected from here. Like, your code isn't actually getting changed for you. And as soon as this code runs, this just disappears or moves around. In HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, there's a document object model, DOM is the abbreviation that you can read all about. It's effectively a copy of all of your code. The browser reads in all of your HTML, all of your CSS, all of your JavaScript, and then when it's moving classes around, it's moving it around in a copy of your code that is then being shown on the screen. So when I say class list remove, it's as if this has been removed from the copy, but it doesn't touch your physical code. This is nice because if it was actually messing with your code, that would get really confusing really fast. Like, you'd run your program and who knows, it would delete half your code or classes that you wanted to be there. So just so you know, class list remove, class list add, and any other changes that you make in JavaScript are being made to basically a shadow copy of your page that was loaded from the files here that you have HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Nothing is actually changing in these files, only in the copy, and the copy is what's being shown to you. So that way you don't get confused by things being moved around in your code that you didn't type. And the third thing that I copied or called out in red text, this was the pseudo class hover. I mentioned it gets added, like it's like as if it just adds something to the list of classes when you hover over something. So when I hover over this play game button, and I'll scroll down here to this button hover here. This is a pseudo class. It uses that colon. It's a lot like a class, but again, pseudo class means fake class. It does real things, but it never gets added to the class list. So what do I mean by that? If you hover over here, it's as if the hover class pseudo class got added to your button, but there is no way it's actually adding a class here. It's not saying class equals hover. You won't see it in the class list. It's completely separate from the actual classes you define in code. That's why they call it a pseudo class. They don't want to confuse the two. I hope I didn't confuse the two. So just realize they're totally separate things. You'll never see the word hover show up like in your class list like this. Like that's not what's going on here with the pseudo class hover. It's a different concept. So anyway, just wanted to make those three things clear. And with that, yeah, I'll basically end the video here. I didn't want this video to get too long. It's already quite long. So this is the end of part 3A. Now we're actually in part 3B going to actually add some analysis content. So until next time.